Germany, 1945. The war is over, but peace has not yet arrived. Across the defeated Reich, the signs of collapse are everywhere. Cities lie shattered beneath layers of dust and twisted steel. Government buildings stand burned and hollowed out, their banners torn down or trampled underfoot. Refugees drift along roads that once carried armies, carrying what remains of their lives in battered suitcases and carts. The Third Reich, which promised a 1,000-year future, has lasted barely 12. As Allied forces advance through occupied Germany, a grim pattern unfolds. Orders are posted in town squares. Curfews are imposed. Weapons are surrendered. Civilians emerge cautiously from basements and shelters, blinking in the daylight, unsure of what the future holds. But among the leadership that brought Germany to ruin, a different pattern emerges, one of disappearance. Adolf Hitler, the architect of the regime, is dead. On April 30th, he takes his own life as Soviet troops close in on Berlin. Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda minister and most fanatical loyalist, murders his children and commits suicide. Heinrich Himmler, the man who built the SS and oversaw a vast system of repression and murder, attempts to flee but is captured and takes cyanide. One by one, the central figures of Nazism remove themselves from history. But not all of them. One man remains alive, conspicuously so. Hermann Göring, commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, founder of the Gestapo, Hitler's longtime deputy. The man once designated as the Führer's successor. As the war ends, Göring is not hiding in a bunker, nor fleeing in disguise. He is still alive, still convinced that his story is not finished. For the Allied leadership, this makes him invaluable. They do not merely want a Nazi captured. They want to face someone through whom the crimes of the regime can be understood, explained, and judged. Someone senior enough to embody the system itself. Someone articulate enough to speak for it. Hermann Göring fits perfectly. From the Allied perspective, Nuremberg is not only about punishment. It is about record, responsibility, and precedent. The world has just witnessed destruction on an unprecedented scale. Entire cities erased, civilian populations targeted. A war of aggression launched in open defiance of international norms. And beneath it all, a regime that governed through ideology, terror, and absolute obedience. To place Nazism itself on trial, the Allies need its living representatives. Göring is the highest ranking of them all. When he arrives at Nuremberg, he does not look like a defeated man. He is heavier now, older, but composed. He carries himself with the confidence of someone who once stood at the very summit of power. He believes, at least at first, that he can still shape the narrative, and that belief is essential to understanding who Hermann Göring was. The trial opens not with Göring's rise, but with his end. The audience knows the outcome. The Reich has fallen. Its leaders are either dead or imprisoned. The question is no longer whether the regime was criminal, but how it became so and who made it possible. Göring sits in the dock as prosecutors outline charges that go far beyond battlefield decisions. He is accused of enabling aggressive war, of helping dismantle democracy, of building the institutions that turned ideology into violence. His guilt, they argue, is not incidental, it is structural. Yet Göring listens carefully, even attentively. He takes notes, he studies the courtroom. This is a man who understands performance, authority, and audience. He has spent decades at the center of power, shaping events through command and charisma. Even now, stripped of rank and uniform, he believes he still matters. That belief is not delusion, it is the result of a lifetime spent at the heart of the Nazi project. To the Allies, Göring is not merely a defendant, he is a gateway. Through him, the court can trace the origins of Nazi power, the militarization of Germany, and the transformation of radical ideology into state policy. He links the early movement to the machinery of war. He links ambition to catastrophe. At Nuremberg, the narrative is already framed as a tragedy told in reverse. The ending is known, the purpose is understanding. And this is why Göring must live long enough to testify. He is the man who connects Hitler's rise to Germany's rearmament. He bridges the gap between street politics and total war. He embodies how a modern state can be captured and weaponized from within. Without him, much of the regime's inner logic would die with its other leaders. As the trial proceeds, Göring watches the world he once commanded examine him as evidence. But to understand how he reached that dock, how a decorated war hero became the symbol of Nazi power, the story must rewind. It must return to a defeated Germany after the First World War, to a man humiliated by loss, to ambition sharpened by resentment, to the moment when opportunity and ideology intersected. Because Hermann Göring did not stumble into history by accident. He climbed into it step by step. If you're finding this documentary-style breakdown valuable, please click the subscribe button and like this video. It helps this work reach more people who want serious, well-researched history. It supports the creation of more long-form historical narratives like this one. Hermann Göring did not enter history as a fanatic or an ideologue. He entered it as a soldier and a celebrated one. During the First World War, Göring served as a fighter pilot in the Imperial German Air Service at a time when aerial combat was still new, personal, and deadly. He proved himself skilled and fearless, eventually being credited with 22 aerial victories. In the final months of the war, he achieved what few could claim: command of Jagdgeschwader 1, the elite fighter squadron once led by Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron himself. For Göring, this was more than military success, it was identity. He wore his medals not merely as honors, but as proof that he belonged among Germany's elite. The cockpit gave him status, purpose, and an intoxicating sense of command. Then the war ended. Germany's defeat shattered more than borders, it shattered meaning. The empire collapsed, the monarchy vanished, and the Treaty of Versailles imposed military restrictions that stripped men like Göring of their profession and pride. The nation he had served now seemed humiliated, disarmed, and directionless. Like many veterans, Göring found himself adrift. He turned to civilian flying, performing as a stunt pilot and exhibition aviator, dangerous work that offered excitement but little dignity. The applause was brief, the pay uncertain. For a man who had once commanded Germany's most famous fighter squadron, it felt like exile. It was in this atmosphere of frustration and wounded pride that Göring encountered Adolf Hitler. Hitler was not yet a national figure. He was a radical agitator leading a small, volatile movement fueled by resentment, nationalism, and promises of renewal. But Göring immediately recognized something others did not: potential. Hitler offered not just ideology, but a narrative one in which Germany had been betrayed rather than defeated, and could rise again through will and discipline. For Göring, it was a return to relevance. He joined Hitler's party early and brought with him something invaluable: respectability. Unlike many of Hitler's followers, Göring was a decorated war hero with elite connections. His presence lent the movement legitimacy, especially among conservatives and veterans who might otherwise have dismissed Hitler as a rabble-rouser. In 1923, Hitler appointed Göring as head of the Sturmabteilung, the SA, or stormtroopers. At the time, these were little more than street fighters engaged in violent clashes with political opponents. Göring approached the role with a soldier's mindset. He imposed structure, hierarchy, and discipline, transforming chaotic brawlers into a more organized paramilitary force. Germany in the early 1920s was a nation on edge. Political assassinations were common, armed groups battled openly in the streets. The Weimar Republic struggled to maintain order. In this environment, Göring thrived. He understood violence not as chaos, but as a tool. That same year, the Nazis attempted to seize power in Munich. The coup, later known as the Beer Hall Putsch, was a disaster. Police opened fire on the marchers. The uprising collapsed almost immediately. Göring was shot and seriously wounded. The physical pain was immense, and doctors administered morphine to ease his suffering. The drug worked, but it did not let go. What began as medical treatment became dependency. Over time, that dependency would deepen into a lifelong addiction, shaping his behavior, judgment, and physical decline. With the coup failed, the Nazi leadership scattered, Hitler was arrested. Göring fled Germany, carrying his injuries, his addiction, and his ambition into exile. For a time, it appeared that his political career and perhaps the movement itself was finished. But Göring had learned something crucial. He had seen how close they had come. When he eventually returned to Germany, the Nazi strategy had changed. Power would no longer be seized by force alone. It would be won through legality, propaganda, and institutional infiltration. Göring adapted quickly. By the late 1920s, he was once again at Hitler's side, this time not as a street commander, but as a political operator. He cultivated connections with industrialists, conservative elites, and military figures. He presented himself as a bridge between radical nationalism and traditional authority. This dual role became his greatest strength. Göring could speak the language of both worlds, the revolutionary and the respectable. He reassured skeptics while energizing loyalists. And as the Nazi movement expanded, his importance grew. When Hitler was appointed chancellor in January 1933, Göring stood at the center of the new government. He was one of only 2 Nazis in the initial cabinet, a remarkable achievement for a party that had once been dismissed as fringe. From this position, Göring moved swiftly. He helped dismantle the democratic structures of the Weimar state, consolidating power under Hitler's leadership. Emergency decrees replaced constitutional safeguards. Political opponents were neutralized. Authority flowed upward, toward the Führer and outward, through men like Göring. For Göring, this was the culmination of a long ascent. He had begun as a war hero cast aside by defeat. He had endured humiliation, exile, and addiction. Now he was once again near the pinnacle of power, this time not in the air, but at the heart of a regime that promised to reshape Germany. Yet the traits that brought him success, ambition, hunger for status, and a willingness to use force were already carrying him toward darker responsibilities. The movement he helped build was no longer merely political, it was becoming institutional. And soon it would turn outward toward rearmament, conquest, and ideological war. By the mid-1930s, Hermann Göring stood at the summit of Nazi power. The movement he had helped shepherd from street violence to state authority was now fully in control of Germany. The transformation was swift and decisive. Once Hitler became chancellor, the remaining structures of democracy collapsed with alarming speed. Opposition parties were crushed, civil liberties erased, and political power centralized in the hands of a few men, chief among them Göring. Unlike many of his rivals within the Nazi hierarchy, Göring did not operate from the shadows. He reveled in visibility, titles accumulated around him: minister, commander, administrator. Each new role expanded his authority and reinforced his image as the regime's most powerful lieutenant. These were his golden years. In 1936, Hitler entrusted Göring with one of the most consequential assignments of the entire regime: the rearmament of Germany. This task was not merely military, it was ideological defiance. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed strict limitations on German forces, designed to prevent another continental war. Göring's mission was to dismantle those restrictions in secret, then in open challenge to the world. The scale was immense. Under Göring's supervision, Germany built a modern fighting force numbering over 500,000 men. Factories expanded, new weapons were developed. Industrial output was reorganized to serve war preparation. This was not improvisation, it was systematic militarization, carried out with speed and ambition. At the center of this effort stood Göring's greatest creation, the Luftwaffe. When Germany revealed its air force in 1936, it sent shockwaves through Europe. Sleek aircraft, disciplined pilots, and modern tactics demonstrated that Germany was no longer a defeated power bound by treaties. The Luftwaffe symbolized technological prowess, national revival, and the regime's readiness for war. For Göring, it was deeply personal. A former fighter ace, he saw the Air Force not just as a weapon, but as a reflection of himself. He poured resources into its development, promoting innovation and spectacle in equal measure. Parades, Uniforms and propaganda elevated the Luftwaffe into a symbol of German resurgence. As Hitler's armies advanced, the Luftwaffe cleared their path. Its aircraft bombed enemy positions, shattered defenses, and enforced German dominance across the skies. The successes of early expansion reinforced Göring's confidence and his belief that power justified itself. But military achievement did not exist in isolation. Göring's authority extended beyond the battlefield. He played a central role in shaping the regime's internal policies, particularly those driven by ideology. As the Nazi state radicalized, lines between military, political, and racial objectives blurred. Göring was not a passive observer of this process. He was deeply involved in the regime's actions against Germany's Jewish population. He supported and facilitated policies that stripped Jews of rights, property, and protection. More than that, he helped articulate the regime's intent. It was Göring who suggested the idea of a final solution to what the Nazis termed the Jewish question language that masked the reality of systematic persecution. This marked a turning point. The man who had once claimed to act in the name of national revival was now directly complicit in ideological crime. Rearmament and repression became intertwined. The same state that built aircraft and armies also built systems of exclusion and destruction. As war approached, Göring stood at the intersection of ambition and catastrophe. The Luftwaffe, once his pride, began to show its limits. As the conflict expanded, demands increased. Resources were strained, enemy resistance hardened. The air force that had seemed unstoppable now faced challenges it had not been designed to meet. And yet, Göring remained confident publicly at least. He continued to project strength, dismissing warnings and overestimating Germany's capacity. His addiction, never truly controlled, worsened under pressure. His physical appearance changed. Excess replaced discipline, illusion replaced realism. The war he had helped prepare for was no longer unfolding according to plan. Germany's enemies adapted, bombing campaigns reached deep into the Reich, industrial centers burned. Civilians died under air raids. The same weapon Göring had once wielded now turned against his own country. Responsibility followed inevitably. As the tide turned, Göring's position weakened. Failures could no longer be concealed behind propaganda. The Luftwaffe could not deliver the decisive victories it had promised. Other figures within the regime gained influence, while Göring's authority eroded. Yet his culpability did not fade. By enabling rearmament, aggressive war, and ideological persecution, Göring had bound his fate to the regime's trajectory. The system he helped construct now consumed itself. The moral collapse was complete. What began as ambition hardened into complicity. What had been framed as national restoration revealed itself as organized destruction. Göring, once the symbol of German air power and confidence, became a symbol of excess, denial, and moral failure. As the Reich began to collapse under the weight of its own crimes, Göring faced a choice that many of his peers would make differently. He could disappear into death, or he could attempt to survive. If this deep historical analysis is valuable to you, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps ensure that serious, well-researched history continues to reach a wider audience. As the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, its leaders faced a narrowing set of choices. Some fled, some hid, many chose death. Suicide became, in the final weeks, an act of loyalty, defiance, or escape. Hermann Göring chose something else. While Berlin burned and Hitler retreated into his bunker, Göring imagined survival. He believed that his rank, experience, and political skill still gave him leverage. Where others saw only ruin, he saw a possible future one in which Germany would need administrators, negotiators, and men who understood power. This belief was rooted in ego, but also in precedent. Göring had survived disgrace before. He had outlasted exile, addiction, and political failure. He had always returned, so he did not disappear. Despite being one of the most wanted men in Europe, Göring remained visible. He allowed himself to be captured by Allied forces, presenting himself not as a criminal, but as a statesman. He assumed that the victors would recognize his value, that they would see him as a stabilizing figure in a shattered country. It was a profound miscalculation. The Allies did not need Göring's advice. They needed his accountability. From the moment of his capture, Göring became a prize. He was the highest-ranking Nazi leader to survive the war, and his presence alone carried symbolic weight. Transported to Nuremberg, he entered a process unlike any the world had seen before. The trial was not merely about punishment, it was about precedent. For the first time, leaders of a sovereign state would be held criminally responsible for waging aggressive war and for crimes committed in the name of ideology. The court sought to establish that authority did not excuse atrocity and that obedience was not a defense. At the center of it all sat Hermann Göring. From the opening days, he dominated the courtroom. He was articulate, confident, and combative. He challenged prosecutors, corrected witnesses, and attempted to frame the Nazi leadership as a conventional government acting in what it believed were national interests. For a time, his performance unsettled the court. Göring understood law, rhetoric, and theater. He portrayed himself as Hitler's loyal deputy, but distanced himself from the regime's worst crimes. He claimed ignorance where evidence suggested involvement. He framed genocide as policy carried out by others, but documents spoke more clearly than words. As the prosecution unfolded, Göring's role became unmistakable. Evidence linked him directly to rearmament, to the creation of institutions of repression, and to ideological policies that paved the way for mass crime. His signature appeared on orders. His authority was documented in detail. The man who had once commanded Germany's skies now faced the weight of his own paper trail. The trial also stripped away Göring's illusions of control. His health declined. His addiction, previously masked by access to drugs, was exposed and curtailed. Without chemical support, his physical and emotional state deteriorated. The image of power began to fade. Yet even as the case against him closed in, Göring remained defiant. He insisted that history would judge him differently, that future generations would understand the pressures and ambitions of his time, that he had acted as a statesman, not a criminal. The court disagreed. When the verdict was delivered, Göring was found guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. For the man who had once styled himself as Germany's natural leader, the judgment was absolute. There would be no negotiated role, no political rehabilitation, no return. But Göring would not allow the court its final act. On the eve of his execution, he took his own life using cyanide smuggled into his cell. It was a final assertion of controller's refusal to submit fully to the authority that now judged him. The act was controversial, but the outcome was unchanged. Hermann Göring did not escape judgment. His death did not erase his crimes, nor did it alter the historical record established at Nuremberg. He was not remembered as a negotiator or a misunderstood statesman. He was remembered as one of the central architects of a regime that brought unprecedented destruction. His life traced the arc of the Third Reich itself: rapid ascent, intoxicating power, moral collapse, and inevitable reckoning. Göring did not merely serve Nazism. He shaped it, protected it, and empowered it until it consumed him. And at Nuremberg, the world learned a lesson written in his downfall, that no position of authority places a leader beyond responsibility, and that history, when denied justice, will eventually demand it.